She thought it was just a dagger, a conversation piece, a toy to mock in front of her friends. But when she dropped that 17th century tanto dagger, its lacquer sheath cracking against the hardwood, she didn't just break a blade. She shattered a legacy. What she didn't know was that the piece had been professionally verified in Kyoto, traced back to a samurai retainer who served under Date Masamune. There were papers, appraisals, documentation. That cracked sheath alone was worth over $140,000. 3 days of silence later, she got the letter. Not from him, but from the insurance company. They were suing her. And she laughed until she read the numbers. Until she realized there were witnesses. Until her lawyer told her they couldn't make this disappear. She didn't just pay in money. She paid in ruin. The house? On the market. The credit? Wrecked. The marriage? Over. The reputation she once flaunted? Gone. And the man she mocked for, playing museum? He walked away with every piece she never understood and built a life so powerful, her name was no longer even in the story. I stood in front of the glass case, staring at the reflection split between me and 100 years of lacquered armor. The lighting hit just right, soft enough to honor the past, sharp enough to draw out every curve of the steel, every faded thread of the silk cords. A kid pointed at the kabuto helmet and whispered, "Was that a real samurai?" His dad looked over at me, smiled, and nodded. I didn't say a word. Didn't need to. This wasn't just an exhibition. It was everything I had built. Every dollar I didn't spend on vacations or dinners out. Every night I stayed late researching Edo-era clan emblems. Every weekend I drove 4 hours to inspect a mask or scroll or blade I saw in an estate listing. This wasn't a hobby. This was breath. People moved slow through the gallery, quiet, respectful. Some bowed slightly at the tokonoma alcove, didn't know what it was, but they felt the weight of it. They felt something. That was all I ever wanted. Just that. But not her. She stood across the room with her sister, sipping champagne like she was waiting for a real party to start. Dressed to impress, lips tight, eyes skimming the crowd like this whole place smelled off. Her gaze finally landed on me, flat, tired. Then she melted. Seriously. Like she couldn't believe I went through with it. Like this whole thing, this moment, this room, was just another one of my childish fixations. Swords and scrolls and masks and history. Nothing real. And I swear, in that second, everything inside me just shifted. Not like an earthquake. More like a quiet tilt. The kind you don't notice until the picture on the wall is crooked and you realize the whole house moved. She wasn't just disinterested. She was done. And not just with tonight. With me. The thing is, I don't think she ever really started. She used to call me the sword guy at dinner parties. Thought it was funny. Thought I didn't notice. But I did. Every smirk. Every time she told her brother I was playing museum. Every time she walked into my study and said, "Ugh, it's like a funeral in here." That wasn't humor. That was dismissal. And that night, it finally landed. She didn't just dislike my passion. She resented it. And somewhere along the line, my own family started following her lead. I turned back to the glass. Inside it, the armor stood still, flawless, patient, unbothered. The man behind the mask, behind the metal, he didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He just endured. I looked at that reflection and saw something I hadn't in years: dignity. Not pride. Not defiance. Just clarity. That was the moment I stopped trying to get them to see me. That was the moment I chose silence. The next morning, I made tea in the same clay cup I had offered to guests the night before. No applause. No polite nods. Just steam curling upward like breath from a sleeping dragon. The kind of silence that didn't ask for company. She didn't say a word when she passed through the kitchen. Just picked at a croissant, tapped through her phone, and mumbled something about going to her sister's later. I didn't ask which one. Didn't ask when she'd be back. That used to feel like surrender. Now it felt like peace. I walked back to my study and closed the door, softly, like always. The room smelled of cedar and old ink, faint smoke from the incense that still lingered from last night. On the center pedestal stood the cracked gnome mask, the one with the crooked smile. I had bought it even though it was damaged. Maybe because it was. There was something honest about it. I traced the fracture line with my finger. It ran from the cheekbone down to the jaw, like a quiet truth someone tried to hide. My wife had once asked why I didn't fix it. I told her not everything broken needs mending. Some things need remembering. She laughed and called it poetic. I called it survival. Outside that room, my life looked fine. A house, a job, a woman who smiled in front of strangers. But inside, it had been cracking for years. Not loudly. Not enough for the neighbors to hear. just steady, silent, like water working into stone. And now, finally, I had stopped patching it. I sat on the cushion beside the armor case. Not because I was sad, because I needed to see him again. The man in the glass. The version of me who didn't bend. The one who wore his silence like armor and let the world misinterpret it as weakness. But silence isn't weak. It's patient. That's what they never understood. Her sister once joked I was half monk, half antique dealer. Said it like a punchline. My father-in-law liked to ask me at every barbecue if my sword things were paying the mortgage yet. They all laughed. Even she laughed. I didn't. Because I knew what they didn't. Every time they mocked me, every time they dismissed this room, I invested a little more. I researched a little deeper. I made calls overseas. Negotiated deals in whispers. Every laugh they shared behind my back was another nail in their own ignorance. They thought I was wasting time. But I was building something they couldn't see. And now, for the first time, I stopped trying to explain it. Let them stay blind. Some things are meant to be seen only by those who know where to look. 3 days after the exhibit, she invited her parents over for dinner. I wasn't asked. Just heard her on the phone while I was in the garage, oiling an old wakizashi blade that had come in from Kyoto. Yeah, bring wine, she said. He'll be in his cave anyway. His cave. Not my study. Not the gallery. Just a cave now. Somewhere to store the weird husband until the guests leave. I didn't argue. I lit a stick of incense and watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling. I had stopped correcting people a while ago. Let them think what they want. You can't explain sacred things to people who see price tags instead of history. I stayed quiet all evening. Ate alone. Listened to laughter bounce off the walls like echoes from a house I no longer recognized. Her mother peeked in once. Wrinkled her nose at the armor. It's still here, she said. As if I should have taken it all down now that the party was over. It'll always be here, I said. Not loud. Just clear. She didn't reply. Just walked away, humming. They had no idea what they were standing next to. That behind those glass cases were pieces older than their bloodlines. That I had spent years tracking down a single scroll fragment through 3 different collectors. That I knew the name of the craftsman who carved the Minpo mask on display, and the story of the daughter he lost during a flood the year it was finished. To them, it was decoration. Dusty metal. Old junk. To me, it was the only thing that hadn't lied to me. That night, after they left, she stood in the hallway, arms folded. You can't even pretend to be social anymore? She asked. I looked at her and felt nothing. No anger. No defense. Just distance. You threw a party, I said. I wasn't on the guest list. She stared at me, confused, like the words didn't register. That's when I knew. We weren't even speaking the same language anymore. She needed noise. Applause. Validation. And I had long since traded all of that for stillness. There was no point fighting it. This wasn't a war. It was a departure. And silently, part of me had already left. I closed the door behind me that night and sat beside the sword rack. I didn't cry. Didn't pour a drink. I just opened a notebook and wrote down 2 things. August 17th. Realized I am no longer part of this house. Good. Then I underlined that last word 3 times. Good. 2 weeks later, she asked if we could talk. Not gently. Not warmly. Just that sharp tone people use when they've already made up their mind. She sat across from me at the kitchen table like we were negotiating a sale. You need to sell a few pieces, she said. That display's taking up the whole damn room. It's not like a museum is ever going to care about your little collection. She called it little. I stared at her for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to be sure she heard the silence before the words. I'm not selling a single piece, I said. Not to pay for countertops or trips you'll pretend to enjoy. She scoffed. You're really gonna die with a bunch of swords in your garage? I smiled. Better than dying surrounded by people who never listened. Her jaw twitched. She didn't like that. People like her don't like it when the quiet ones speak clearly. That night, she slammed a door so hard the armor stand in the hallway shook. I checked it. No damage. Unlike what came next. Because 5 days later, during a weekend open house I didn't agree to, she dragged one of my most fragile items, a 17th century tanto dagger still in its original lacquer sheath, out into the center room. I watched from the hall as she dropped it on the table in front of her friends. You guys want to see what my husband thinks is more important than a real life? They laughed. One of them picked it up like it was a toy. I didn't move. Just stood there. Then it happened. The sound that still sits in my bones, the crack of lacquer against hardwood. The blade hadn't shattered, but the sheath had splintered, centuries of care gone in a second. Everyone froze. Even her. I walked in. Quiet. Calm. Picked up the broken piece. Ran my thumb along the crack. Then looked her in the eyes. "Thank you," I said. She blinked. "What?" I didn't repeat myself. Just walked back to the study and shut the door. Because that one act of destruction? That gave me everything I needed. She'd made it public. There were witnesses. And what she broke wasn't just a dagger. It was the final excuse I needed to leave this life behind and take something valuable with me on the way out. I didn't speak to her for 3 days. Not out of spite. Out of focus. I spent those days gathering documents, photos, appraisals, everything I had kept, just in case someone ever tried to treat my collection like decoration. She thought she cracked a toy. What she actually damaged was a registered national item listed under a private restoration license. The lacquer on that sheath? Verified in Kyoto. The blade? Traced back to a samurai retainer who served under Date Masamune. There were papers. There were signatures. There were numbers. She broke something that had been valued at over $140,000. And there were witnesses. When the notice from my attorney arrived, she thought it was a joke. "You're suing me?" she asked, laughing like this was a bad sitcom. "No," I said. "The insurance company is. I'm just the owner." She didn't laugh after that. But the truth is, I didn't want her money. Not really. I wanted space. Distance. I wanted to remove the last piece of her from the life I had been rebuilding in silence. So I offered a deal. She could keep the house. Keep the furniture, the guest list, the noise. I would take the study, the glass cases, the armor, the broken sheath, everything she never understood. I watched her read the terms with red eyes and a clenched jaw. Her lawyer whispered something. She nodded, slowly. "Fine," she said. "Take your damn toys." I smiled. "Thank you." That was the last real thing I ever said to her. The morning I left, no one helped me load the van. No send-off. No guilt. Just wind through the trees and the soft clink of metal on wood as I carefully packed every piece into padded cases. The broken sheath was the last to go. I didn't tape the box shut. I wanted to see the crack every time I opened it, like a scar that proved I had finally stopped letting people define the value of what I love. As I drove away, the sun was rising. My phone buzzed once, some bank alert, probably hers trying to move money around. I turned it off. All I could hear was the soft shifting of armor in the back. Steel and silk and lacquer, whispering with every bump in the road. They weren't just relics anymore. They were witnesses. And they were coming with me. I rented a studio on the edge of town. Brick walls. Wide windows. Dust in the air like it had been waiting years for someone to care about the space again. The landlord was skeptical at first. "You sure you don't need plumbing? A kitchen? You just want display lighting?" I nodded. "Just the light." It took 2 weeks to build it out. I didn't rush. Each case had a place. Each scroll unrolled with care. I mounted the armor beneath soft, warm track lights that made the iron look like it was breathing. For the first time, everything had its own space. No one asking why it was there. No one rolling their eyes when I explained the origin of a crest, or how a single bend in a blade told the story of a different battle. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was making something sacred. A month later, the soft launch began. Quiet. Invitation only. I didn't advertise it as a museum. I called it a reflection house. People walked in and paused like they had stepped out of time. No music. No chatter. Just slow footsteps on old wood and the weight of 1,000 silent stories behind glass. A local art student asked if I had designed it all myself. "No," I said. "It designed me." That answer stayed with her. I saw her come back 2 more times in a week. Some people stayed an hour. Others only a few minutes. But none of them asked if it was worth anything. They didn't need to. They felt it. One evening, I sat alone on the bench by the main display. The cracked sheath rested under a single spotlight. A man approached it, stared for a while, then looked over at me. "It's beautiful," he said, "even with the damage." Because of the damage, I corrected softly. He nodded. Didn't say another word. That's when I realized I hadn't lost anything. Not really. Not when I left her. Not when I walked away from the house, the kitchen, the family that never saw me. I had been invisible for so long they forgot I had shape. But in this room, I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. And all I had to do was stop fighting to be seen by the wrong eyes. It had been almost 2 months since I walked out. No texts. No calls. No, "we miss you." Just digital silence. And that was fine. Until one day, someone broke it. Her brother, Ryan. He showed up at the studio unannounced, hands in his pockets, eyes darting around like the swords might judge him. "Didn't know if you'd still be here," he said. "I'm not hiding," I replied. He shifted awkwardly. "Look, I didn't know she'd take it that far. With the dagger, I mean. I didn't say anything. Just let the weight of the broken lacquer speak for itself." He cleared his throat. "She's been telling people you went crazy, that you left the family for, like, samurai ghosts or something." I laughed under my breath. "That's not far off." He paused in front of the cracked sheath. "This is the one, huh?" I nodded. He leaned in, really looked at it. And for once, he didn't treat it like junk. Didn't joke. Didn't belittle. He just stood there, quiet. "She's in trouble, you know," he finally said. "Divorced now. House on the market. Credit wrecked. Her choices," I said. He looked at me like he expected more. Anger, gloating, even satisfaction. But there was none of that left in me. She had thrown a match into the house of our lives, thinking I'd burn first. But I had already moved the important things out. He sighed. "You ever think about reaching out? Just to, I don't know, clear the air?" "No," I said, standing up. "Some air stays clearer when left alone." He nodded slowly. Before he left, he turned back once more and said, "You know, I always thought this stuff was just weird old junk. But now, it kind of feels like a shrine." I didn't answer. He left, and I went back to polishing a helmet from the Edo period, its surface dark, its curve smooth, its purpose once protection, now reflection. She had broken a piece of history. But in doing so, she carved open a new chapter for mine. The people who used to walk past me in that house without seeing me, now they paid to step into my silence. They stood in line for it. It started with one article. Some local arts blog wrote a piece about the studio, called it the stillest place in town. Said stepping into the room was like being wrapped in memory, even if it wasn't yours. That line stuck. Then came the emails. Teachers, veterans, therapists, people asking if they could bring students, patients, or just themselves. I never said no. Some walked in with questions. Most walked out with none. And somewhere in that silence, I realized I wasn't just preserving history. I was offering something no one knew they needed: stillness. There were no signs on the wall explaining anything. I didn't hover. I didn't lecture. Sometimes I sat in the back with a cup of tea, watching strangers stand in front of the same armor that once sat ignored in my living room. They stood like it mattered. Because now, it did. And then one day, she walked in. Not my ex-wife. Her mother. The woman who once laughed at my collection at Thanksgiving. Who said, "It's nice he has a hobby," like I was a child building model trains in the garage. She didn't see me at first. Just wandered through slowly, heels echoing on the floor, hands clasped tightly in front of her. She stopped in front of the broken sheath. Tilted her head. Read the small engraved plaque beneath it. "Some things break loud enough to wake the silence." I watched her blink. She turned and saw me. No smile. No greeting. Just the tight-lipped look of someone seeing something they didn't expect to grow. She opened her mouth to speak. But I held up a hand, gently. "I don't need anything," I said. "Not an apology. Not a visit." She nodded once. Maybe in shame. Maybe in respect. I'll never know. She left without a word. And the air felt cleaner. That's the thing no one tells you. Silence is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of peace. I didn't destroy anything. Didn't scream. Didn't prove them wrong. I just kept building. Now, people came to see the man who stood behind the glass. And for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible anymore. It was late. The gallery closed. Lights dimmed except for the main case in the center. I stood alone, facing the full suit of armor that had taken me 10 years to assemble. Every plate, every thread, every crease in the silk told a story. And now, so did I. There's a moment, if you stand long enough in front of something you've cared for, where you stop seeing the object and start seeing the person who kept it alive. That night, I saw myself. Not the version she knew. Not the husband who made dinner while they rolled their eyes behind his back. Not the placeholder who smiled at holidays, who nodded through disrespect just to keep the peace. No, this version stood taller. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't proud. He was still. And I understood something. I had never needed to be loud to matter. I just needed to stop asking to be heard by people who only listened to themselves. That glass didn't just protect history. It revealed it. Behind me, I kept a simple journal where I wrote down one sentence a night. Sometimes a memory. Sometimes just a thought. That night I wrote, I used to think silence was what happened when no one cared. Now I know silence is what happens when you do. I closed the book. The next day, a man visited with his teenage son. He said they'd read about the place and just wanted to see what all the stillness was about. I guided them through once. No sales pitch. Just facts. Quiet ones. Before they left, the son tapped the glass gently and asked, "Was this stuff yours?" "All of it," I said. He nodded like that meant something. And I realized it did. That cracked sheath? That one broken piece? It had been the beginning of a new kind of strength. One that didn't need applause or understanding. Just space. Sometimes we carry things not because the world values them, but because they hold the version of us we never want to lose again. It started with an email, then a call, then another. Someone from a Japanese cultural consortium had heard about the studio. One of their U.S. representatives stopped by quietly during visiting hours. Didn't introduce herself at first. Just looked, listened, took notes, then handed me a card on her way out and said, "We may be in touch." A week later, they offered me a spot at an international showcase in San Francisco. Full expenses paid. One piece from my collection, with my name, displayed alongside generational historians and curators. I stared at the message for a long time. Because years ago, I would have forwarded that email to my wife. To share the good news. To feel seen. Now, the silence around me was louder than any celebration. And I liked it that way. Still, I accepted. Not for her. Not for them. For the glass. I chose a Kabuto helmet. Mid-16th century. Visor etched with a crescent moon. Quiet, dignified, and slightly dented near the crest, a flaw I'd never repaired. They sent someone to help pack it. Before they left, he asked, "Do you want to include a short quote or inscription for the placard?" I thought for a moment. Then I said, "Write this. Some inherit a legacy. Others build one from silence." He raised an eyebrow, then nodded slowly, like he understood more than he let on. A few days later, I got a call. It was her. The ex. I let it ring. I let it go to voicemail. But she didn't leave one. Later, I found out she had seen the event announcement online. Friends tagging her, old coworkers resharing the post with comments like, "Didn't your husband used to collect this stuff?" Or, "Wow, he really made something out of that weird hobby, huh?" And suddenly, I wasn't the punchline anymore. I was the headline. But that's the thing. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. And now that I had it, I realized just how little noise I needed to feel full. Because when you stop chasing people who never clapped for you, you can finally hear your own footsteps. And mine were steady. The museum hall in San Francisco was silent when I arrived. Early access for contributors only. Just me, a few curators, and the sound of spotlights warming to life overhead. My helmet stood in its glass case, polished, positioned, lit like something sacred. There was no fanfare. No speeches. Just names beneath the lights, each one a story etched in silence. And mine was finally among them. Later that evening, during the opening reception, people gathered. Photographers. Historians. Even a few influencers, taking selfies with the artifacts like souvenirs from someone else's reverence. I watched from the side. I wasn't wearing a badge. I didn't tell anyone who I was. I just watched. Two women stopped at my piece. One pointed at the inscription and read it aloud. "Some inherit a legacy. Others build one from silence." She leaned in. "That's powerful." Her friend nodded. "Wonder who wrote it?" I smiled and took a sip of my coffee. Funny how the world changes when you stop asking for credit and just keep building. That night, back in my hotel room, I received a photo. Not from her. From her sister. A screenshot of a group chat, her mother, her aunt, her, arguing. "Did you know he was doing this? Why didn't anyone tell me? This is embarrassing." People keep asking me. No one replied. I didn't answer the message either. Not because I was angry. Because I no longer needed to be part of the conversation. I had built a life they couldn't interrupt. Couldn't minimize. Couldn't turn into a punchline. I was no longer the man explaining himself at dinner tables. I was the man in the glass. That night, I wrote a new sentence in my journal. When they finally look for you, let them find glass, not flesh, reflection, not reaction. I closed the book and turned off the light. Outside my window, the city moved on, no applause, no fireworks. Just the hum of quiet, undeniable presence. Mine. It was a Tuesday when she walked in. Maybe 15, maybe 16. Hoodie pulled low, eyes avoiding contact. Her school counselor had emailed the week before, asking if she could shadow the gallery for a few days. Quiet girl. Loves history. Struggles with noise. I said yes. She didn't say much at first, just followed me as I unlocked the display cases, wiped the dust from the lacquered surfaces, adjusted lighting. The first day, she didn't ask a single question, but she never looked away. The second day, she stopped in front of the helmet, the one from the San Francisco exhibit. She stared at it for almost 10 minutes before speaking. Why didn't you fix the dent? I paused. Because it survived something. She nodded slowly, like that made sense. By the third day, she was asking about each piece, how I found them, how I restored them, what they meant. Not in a talkative way. She still spoke like she was borrowing the words, not owning them. But I could tell, she was listening harder than most adults ever did. On the final day, I handed her a soft brush and nodded toward a minor set of shoulder plates from the late Edo period. Want to try? I asked. She looked at the brush like it might break in her hands. But she took it. Carefully. Quietly. Like it was something sacred. And in that moment, I saw it, what the collection had become. Not a shrine to the man I used to be. A bridge to the ones coming next. She didn't need to know about the betrayal. The broken dagger. The mockery. The silence I drowned in to build this place. She just needed a brush. And time. And stillness. That night, I wrote another sentence in the back of my journal. Sometimes we build legacies not to be remembered, just so someone else knows how to begin. When she left that afternoon, she said, "Thanks. Not much more. Didn't need to be." The loudest things are often the ones we never say. The email had too many zeros. An executive from a private collectors group in New York wanted to acquire 3 pieces from my collection. Said they were deeply moved by the exhibit in San Francisco. They offered a number I would have once dreamed of. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked to the cabinet in the back, opened the top drawer, and pulled out the cracked sheath. The one that started it all. It still carried a faint scar down the side, one I refused to polish out. I held it, turned it in my hands, and smiled. Some things look broken to everyone else, but feel whole in your hands. Later that week, a man in a tailored suit showed up at the gallery. He introduced himself as a representative of the buyer. Smooth voice. Perfect smile. The kind of charm that made you want to say yes before you even knew the question. He gestured toward the display. This could be in museums. Vaults. You'd be compensated well, of course. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. It already is in a museum, I said. He chuckled. I mean a real one. I raised an eyebrow. He realized his mistake. Silence did the rest. He left without another word. After he was gone, I locked the doors and dimmed the lights. Sat in the center of the room, surrounded by stories that had outlived kings and fires and wars. And now, outlived betrayal. They wanted to buy the result. But none of them could afford the journey. That night, I didn't write in the journal. I just stood in front of the glass, watching my reflection blur against the metal and silk in time. I didn't need to sell anything, because I'd already bought back every piece of myself they tried to throw away. And I was no longer for sale. It was nearly closing time. Rain tapped gently against the skylight, and the floor was polished clean. I was locking the last cabinet when I heard the knock. 3 soft taps. Hesitant, I opened the door and saw her standing there, umbrella folded, hair damp, eyes uncertain. Her. No apology. No explanation. Just silence filling the space between us like steam rising off cold ground. She looked older. Not in the way people age, but in the way guilt settles into the corners of a face. I saw the interview, she said softly. The one from the exhibit. You looked. She trailed off, waiting for me to finish the sentence. I didn't. She looked past me into the gallery, at the glass cases glowing under the lights. Her gaze landed on the cracked sheath. You kept it, she whispered. Of course I had. She stepped in slowly, as if waiting for permission that would never come. Her voice barely rose above the hum of the rain. I didn't know you could turn it into this. I nodded once. Not out of agreement, just acknowledgement. Like one does when someone finally sees the obvious. I was wrong, she said. Still, I didn't speak. She sighed, folding her arms. Do you hate me? I let the silence hold her. Then I said, no. I just stopped asking you to understand. Her eyes welled. She looked at the armor as if it could explain things for her. It's beautiful, she said. I shook my head. It's complete. She stood there for a moment longer, expecting something. A bridge. A door. A sign. But none came. Because this wasn't a story that ended in reunion. It ended in reflection. She left quietly. No slam. No drama. And I stayed standing, the same way I had the day she broke the blade and laughed. Still. Steady. unshaken. That night I wrote, when they come back, let them find you too far to reach. Not out of cruelty, out of growth. Because sometimes, the only way forward is to remain exactly where they can no longer follow. I never rebuilt the broken sword, never replaced it, never filed down its scar. It sits, quietly, in the middle of the collection, not as a relic, but as a witness. People always pause there. Some ask if it's damaged. Some ask if it's symbolic. I tell them, both. But truth is, it's not the blade they're looking at. It's the man it broke. And the man who didn't stay broken. The gallery's quiet most days now. Visitors come and go. Students. Travelers. The curious. Some leave donations. Some leave questions. A few leave changed. And I leave it all the same. Every morning, I unlock the doors. Every evening, I lock them again. Not because I'm guarding something fragile, but because I'm protecting something earned. The girl with the hoodie still visits sometimes. Now with steady hands and her own brush. She teaches a small group once a week. She never raises her voice. Never needs to. They listen like every word carries weight. Because it does. A local journalist once asked if I'd ever thought of franchising. Turning it into a chain. Opening more galleries in more cities. I smiled and said, you don't mass-produce meaning. He didn't print that part. Didn't matter. Because the people who matter, they don't need it printed. They feel it. Sometimes, late at night, I walk through the empty hall alone. I stop in front of the largest case. The light hits just right. I see everything I've built. The layers. The time. The stillness. And then I see him. The man in the glass. Not the boy who tried to earn love with his passion. Not the husband who laughed through gritted teeth at dinner tables. Not the man who swallowed silence like it was oxygen. No. I see the one who came after. The one who watched it all fall apart and built something better from the ruins. The one who never shouted. The one who never begged. The one who never sold his piece for their approval again. I nod to him sometimes. He never nods back. But I know he sees me. Because he is me. And for the first time in a long time. That's enough.